Jim Matheson is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, NRECA, the national service organization that represents the nation's more than 900 not-for-profit, consumer-owned electric cooperatives. NRECA members provide service to 42 million people in 48 states. Jim joined NRECA in 2016 following a distinguished careers in both the public and private sector. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Jim. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Well, thank you. Happy to have the opportunity to do this. I wish I was there in person. I think it's always a little awkward to have a virtual presentation because, quite frankly, I'm looking at a screen and a camera, and I have no idea if any of you are paying attention or if you've all decided to take a break or what. So I'll just keep going. But as was mentioned by the previous in the introduction, I know that they're going to take some questions, and I encourage that. Happy to make sure I address whatever is on your mind, and happy to do that. But I'll make some opening comments about where things stand from our perspective on this broader issue of electric reliability and where the public policy world is today. For those of you who were at the when I presented last year, reliability was a big topic then as well. In fact, it's been something I've been beating the drum on for several years, as I've seen a scenario unfolding where after a couple of decades of demand across this country staying flat for electricity, demand is growing and our supply isn't keeping up. And in fact, in many cases, we're shutting down existing power plants for the end of their useful life. And you don't need to have a degree in engineering to understand that when supply is going down and demand's going up, that's not good. And we need to have a conversation about how we effectively meet this challenge, but also tremendous opportunity as a country for this growth in electric demand, because that means the economy's growing. That means investments are being made in this country in terms of increased manufacturing that's coming back onshore, in terms of the tremendous power demands of artificial intelligence, which is coming, whether you feel good about that or not. But the big question on artificial intelligence is who's going to win that race to be the dominant country in the world for artificial intelligence, and it's a race between the United States and China. And so I think that while I felt like a lonely voice for the past few years talking about reliability, I'm not lonely anymore, because this artificial intelligence demand and the understanding we're in a significant race as a country has created much greater awareness about the need for increased supply to meet these demands. And that translates to the policy arena as well. So I think that's really good news. Now, it's important that we also talk about that. I've made a priority to talk about the value of dispatchable resources, which no one knows what that means in the policy world. So I describe them as always available resources. Always available resources, which are available 24/7. Are a great value because we use electricity 24/7. And quite frankly, they increase the value of intermittent resources, of wind or solar. Wind or solar as standalone do not have nearly the value that they have when they're part of a portfolio and a system that also has a good degree of dispatchable resources. So, I know it's an old phrase that's been used of we're for all of the above, but you really need all of them to make it work best. And it's all about having the right portfolio and making those investments. Our approach at NRECA on this issue has been very consistent. It's interesting, if you look at Washington, D.C., and the fact that you've had such a significant change in the politics and the environment in Washington, D.C. from just last year to this year, new administration, new party in control of the Senate. We haven't changed anything about what we say in the agenda we're pursuing. It has nothing to do with political party. We have approached the issues based on what's right for our member at the end of the line. And we say the same things. And I think that serves us well in the policy arena because I'll get to reliability in a second. But I just want to make one observation about how to be effective in politics these days. Politics is a tough business. And there's a lot of rhetoric, and social media and the internet have allowed all sorts to happen every second of every day. It's right in your face. You know that. And it's created a situation where a lot of people don't trust anyone. And in Washington, that trust is at a premium. And the fact that we don't change what we say, the fact that we don't change what we do based on which direction the political winds happen to be blowing, that serves us really well. We have a level of respect on both sides of the aisle in Washington, and it's because we're not about a party, we're about that member at the end of the line. So I just want to emphasize that to the extent that any of you are engaged in the advocacy component of electric cooperatives, that consistent role of being the truth teller and not catering to different political winds, it gives you a credibility over time, because when people change their message over time, they undercut their credibility. So we've got a situation where President Trump comes in office. He issues an executive order the first day about energy dominance. He recognizes the need for us to make significant investments in the opportunities, not just the challenges, the opportunities this country has if it moves ahead. And energy dominance, of course, that covers all forms of energy, but electricity is a significant component of it. He has created a entity called the Energy Dominance Council. I and NRECA have had a number of meetings with the Energy Dominance Council to talk about our view of how we can move forward and make good policy decisions that allow our sector to meet the electric needs of this country. To be candid, our outreach with the Trump administration began last year during the campaign season. They'd already set up a transition team, and we were engaging with that transition team in July of 2024. And we developed detailed policy papers. And whenever a new cabinet secretary is announced for a different department, be it USDA and RUS, be it Department of Energy, be it the Environmental Protection Agency, we delivered that material on day one to the new secretary. We'd already been given it to the transition teams. And it's been really a rewarding experience, because we have a lot of credibility because we've taken the time to give detailed analysis. So in a world where politics is all rhetoric and rapid fire stuff on the internet, turns out substance still matters. And we have a level of credibility where these cabinet heads, be it the head of EPA, I met with him second week on the job. He was still unpacking boxes in his office, but he requested the meeting. He wanted to meet with us, whether it's with Chris Wright, Secretary of Energy, same thing. Early on, sat down and talked with the secretary, had a good conversation, and the action is so much in the executive branch right now. It's good to have these relationships. And those three departments I mentioned, EPA, DOE, Department of Agriculture, that's where our agenda really lies. And I think we're making progress in terms of the issues that have mattered to us. In EPA, it's really removing a number of burdensome regulations that were tying our hands and putting our country in a worse position in terms of having adequate energy supplies to meet our needs. Now, just because Trump wrote executive order and says, let's get rid of this stuff, doesn't mean it's gone. It takes time to change regulations that are already on the books. I'm pleased to say that under Administrator Zeldin, the EPA is moving to do that. It's going to take time, though, so I want to make sure we all have an understanding of that. We are working hand in glove with the EPA. We have a lot of the technical and economic and legal analysis for what they can do, because we'd already been involved in litigation on the Clean Power Plan specifically. And so I like where they're moving, and I think they're moving in the right direction. When it comes to USDA, I met with Secretary Rollins. She came down to our Power Exchange annual meeting in Atlanta. She'd only been on the job 4 weeks, and I had a chance to talk with her backstage before she spoke. And we talked about the role of the Rural Utility Service. We talked about how if the president has made a priority for energy dominance, that it's not all at the Department of Energy and it's not all at EPA, that in fact, USDA has this existing financing operation under the Rural Utility Service, which I would argue is the most successful infrastructure financing activity the federal government has ever done, because it works. It encourages significant investments, and we don't default on our loans, and the taxpayers make money. And she responded really well to that. I also emphasized at the time about the importance of the New Era projects, which co-ops had. We helped create that program in the previous Congress. We had tremendous response from our members across the country, and these are all clean energy projects. In fact, 85% of them are solar battery. And there was $10 billion of money available just for electric cooperatives. We had $26 billion of applications. So our membership had a significant appetite for seeking that funding to build those projects. And they're moving forward. There was some question when Trump first came in and we're pausing everything, but we're moving forward. Doesn't mean we're out of the woods. There's work to make these happen. But I think that speaks well to the effectiveness of electric cooperatives and talking about, while we've been hammering dispatchable resources, which are going to be fossil fuel or nuclear or hydro, that we also are effective in saying, yes, there's a role for these other technologies, intermittent, that supplement that as well. And this administration has listened to us. So I like where we are with RUS. And by the way, to the extent there are RUS borrowers in the room, I think a statement was made second day Trump was in office, we're freezing all loans and grants, and everyone freaked out. And it was not the right statement to make, and the White House had to walk it back 2 days later. I can tell you RUS is aggressively trying to process applications from electric co-ops, moving along the environmental permitting process for RUS loans. They're moving loans out. If any of you are having a problem or a question about status of an application you've got within RUS, please contact us. We are talking to RUS every day, and often if a member contacts us with a question about the status of their loan application or something's not going right, we engage with RUS, and they've been very, very responsive in moving along and getting those loans processed. So really like the relationship there. And the third area I should mention is the Department of Energy, where, of course, in the previous Congress and under the Biden administration, this major infrastructure bill was passed. And that was a big deal for electric cooperatives in terms of grid resilience. And I'm pleased to say that while the Trump administration wanted to pause on all the things that happened under the previous administration, that the various infrastructure projects that hundreds of electric co-ops are involved in, those projects are moving forward. Invoices are being paid by DOE. Again, the pause is over. And I don't know about future rounds. That's an open question if they're going to do more rounds of that funding. But to the extent that we're involved in that, and electric co-ops are actively involved, I'm pleased to say that, again, the administration has recognized the value of those investments in terms of a resilient grid. So that's my report on the executive branch side of things. I think things are in a good place for us. I think we truly have a seat at the table, and that's where you want to be. If I were to identify one issue that's a bit of an open issue, I'm not saying it's a problem, but it's an open issue. It's the status of FEMA. You've heard, if you've been following in the press, the president said, let's get rid of it altogether at one point. He said, let's have the states fund all this instead. The states don't have the money to do it. The head of FEMA was fired 4 or 5 weeks ago. So there's a lot of uncertainty around that program. That being said, the Trump administration created a FEMA council or advisory council and requested comments from people about how to reform FEMA. And we engaged. We reached out to members across the country. We submitted our comments May 15th to this council. And I'm all for reforming FEMA because the way it has worked in the past has not been great for electric cooperatives. In fact, in my 9 years at NRECA, the most frequent complaint or concern I've heard from members over the 9 years is frustration dealing with FEMA. So I welcome the opportunity to have a seat at the table and talk with the Trump administration and Congress. It may take congressional action to reform FEMA, make it more accountable, more transparent, more predictable, because that's one of the great frustrations. So, but I don't know where it is today. So I highlight that as an issue where we're working hard to develop better understanding of what's going on with FEMA, because it's such a critical entity in terms of storm restoration. And just an example for one of your neighboring states, that ice storm that was, 8-10 weeks ago in Michigan, where more than 1 million acres of trees went down in that state. We have one distribution co-op that the rebuild's going to be around 100 million, and the second's about 120 million. That's unbelievable numbers for 2 distribution co-ops. And obviously FEMA reimbursement is pretty critical, just as an example of how important that program can be. Let me shift a little bit to the legislative branch now and give you an update on what's going on in Congress there. Look, all the attention, if you watch any of the press, is about this budget reconciliation process. That's kind of a mouthful, and that's jargon that's used in DC. But what the budget reconciliation process means, if I can break it down to the most important point, is it's a process where you can pass something without needing to get 60 votes in the Senate. You can do it with a simple majority of 51. And so when a party controls the House, the Senate, and the White House, they've got an opportunity to move a budget reconciliation bill without the filibuster. And so it's often done in a partisan way when it is done. And over time, both parties have done this. They've used budget reconciliation. You only get to do it once a year. You only get one bite of the apple with this. And the terms of budget reconciliation to be able to do this is every provision in the bill has to have an impact on income to the United States government, either money in or expense. So it's on the tax side, revenue up, revenue down, expenses up, expenses down. It can't be policy stuff about, some issue like the Clean Power Plant rule. You can't legislate that in budget reconciliation. So you read where the House passed a bill that it was right for Memorial Day. There's a lot of press on what's in the bill. It barely passed, but it did pass. And yet, this is not the bill that's going to the president's desk. The United States Senate is going to write their own version of the bill. We're a long way from this being done. But I will say in that context, there are a couple of provisions that were important to us that we're keeping an eye on the budget reconciliation process. One, electric co-ops had a huge win in the Inflation Reduction Act when we got something called elective pay, and some people call it direct pay. And what that is for years, Congress has used the tax code to incent investments in various energy technologies. And since we're not-for-profit, we're kind of on the outside looking in. And if you want to do a project with tax incentives, usually some third-party developer would build the project, take the tax credit, take a profit, sell the output to the co-op. Now, co-ops have direct access to the benefit of that tax break, even though we don't pay taxes. The Treasury Department makes a direct payment of the value of that tax credit to the co-op. And it could be on renewables, it could be on carbon capture sequestration. There's a nuclear production tax credit. And that was a big win for co-ops, and we want to preserve that. And the good news is it's still there. When the House moved their reconciliation bill, there was no effort to go after that provision. And I didn't think there would be, because if you get rid of it, it doesn't create a revenue enhancement for the government anyway, and it doesn't remove or eliminate a cost. The way it's scored is it's neutral. But that's something we're keeping a close eye on. The second thing is the House bill accelerated the expiration date for when renewable energy tax credits expire. That's a concern for members who have made decisions to move ahead with projects based on those tax incentives being in place for a defined period of time. Your economics were planned around that set of assumptions, and now, at least in this House bill, they're reducing the amount of the timing in which those incentives would exist. But I said this bill's not done, but that is a concern for members, and it's real clear in the NRECA member resolutions process that we support those tax incentives. And I think the Senate's going to not agree with what the House has done, and that's going to be an issue of contention, but it's still an open issue. So at the risk of repeating myself, we got a long way to go on this bill. Just because the House moved in Memorial Day, it is not even close to what's going to go to the president's desk for a signature, and it could go throughout the year before it's done. And we're active every day on Capitol Hill talking about what's important to us in that bill. And the last issue I want to mention on the legislative side is I think we have an interesting opportunity in this country to address challenges with permitting infrastructure, permitting electric transmission lines, permitting power plants. I think there's a broader consensus building in the policy world about the fact that we have not addressed this for a long time. Quite frankly, Congress passed the National Environmental Policy Act 50 years ago. And there's an understanding that it takes too long to build something in this country. And with this pressure of the huge demand from artificial intelligence, we got to move. This is not something that's 10 or 15 years down the road. It's now. And so I'm not saying Congress is going to pass a massive permitting reform bill next month. I'm just saying this is an area in a fractured, polarized Congress where members on both sides of the aisle understand we got to do something. And so that's an issue we're leaning into as electric cooperatives, because we think it could make decision-making and moving ahead with projects a little better for all of our members. It's still hard work to build anything in this country, but we want to make it better if we can. So that's really a quick review of how we make where Congress is on this reliability issue. I think the biggest step they could take is to help us with permitting, so we could meet this challenge with a less onerous set of requirements in the permitting world. Okay, I've gone for about 15 minutes, and I thought I can keep going, because if you read my bio, I'm a recovering politician, so I can talk for a long, long time. But I thought I might just pause for a second, because I've thrown a lot at you, and see if there are any questions from folks in the audience or things I can help address. So any chance anyone has a question?
Very good. Thank you, Jim. Yes, we do have some questions in the audience. There's one right over here. Are there?
Right.
There's a couple. You had everyone's attention. Well, just to provide some assurances, and just want to say thank you for all of the advocacy that NRECA does on behalf of the cooperatives in this country. So thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Earl Rydell. I'm a member of LREC. I'm kind of wondering about some of your comments, Jim, about moving forward so fast. I would like people to look before they leap. We've gotten in trouble a lot in that way in the past. We've been okaying generation and transmission contracts for like 50 years, and all of a sudden you're saying, well, we got to turn this on so we build stuff tomorrow. Well, do we know what we're building and why? I got another question for you about that, is that $9 billion CO2 pipeline they're trying to build up here. I know that's part of EPA's funding thing, and will it ever be used? There's different stories now coming out about whether CO2 is real. Is there really a CO2 issue, or are we just banging an empty pot? And if you could take a shot at that. And by the way, as far as I know, in the US, we've got no new hydropower. We may get a little bit from Canada, but in the US, they won't let us put in another dam. They're taking them out. Thank you, and I'd appreciate your comments.
Sure. Let me unpack that, because there are a few different things you asked. Let me hit the last one first. You're right, there aren't a lot of major new opportunities for hydro. On the other hand, and this is outside of your region, but in the Pacific Northwest, the Biden administration was moving ahead to tear out 4 dams on the Lower Snake River that were 3,000 megawatts of capacity. We've been very aggressive in fighting against that, and the Trump administration has been very good in working with us to reverse that direction that policy was going, because it does matter. And it's an incredibly valuable resource for that part of the country. Listen, I think that it is an interesting observation that you've made. We're in a business where we make long-term capital-intensive decisions. We don't build assets that last 10 years. We build assets in the electric sector that last 50, 70, 90 years sometimes. And when you have a policy environment where you're getting pulled back and forth, we call it boomerang effect, where every 4 or 8 years we get a new administration, a different party, and they keep pulling us in one direction or the other. That's not good for our industry. Now, there are other industries that are in that category, but it's clearly not good for us. And the notion that we need more of a durable set of policies that we can count on over time is something that we talk about all the time. And without getting in the weeds too much, personal opinion of mine, and I used to be a member of Congress, it's because Congress hasn't done its job for the last 25 years. They're not doing their job. If they put it in statute and pass legislation, we'd have more certainty, but they're not doing it. They just bicker with each other. And every president, starting with Bill Clinton up to Trump, is flexing their muscles and do more executive actions. So I'll get off that soapbox now. But we do need that durable policy environment. But you asked, what are we building for? The demand is coming. There is no doubt the electric demand's already started to spike in this country, and data centers and AI use massive amounts of power. Onshoring and manufacturing, this is coming. And what do we build? Look, while I'm for looking at all technologies in the short run, the dispatchable resource you can build quickly where we've got available fuel, it's natural gas. And I think you're going to see a significant amount of natural gas built in this country. And quite frankly, if you look at the there's like 4 major gas turbine manufacturers in the world. And if you want to buy a gas turbine from them and you want to get it before 2030, you can't, because the utility sector has reserved all of them, not just the electric co-ops, the IOUs and the munis as well, but the utility sector's already placed their bet on gas because they're easier to permit. The cost of gas is relatively low in this country. You can get them built quickly, and they're always available or dispatchable. So we are moving ahead with gas. I believe that's going to be the preferred fuel. Now, there aren't enough gas pipelines to meet this demand, and that's another issue this country has to deal with, is the siting of gas pipelines. But I think that's where we're going in the short to midterm. In the longer term, the issue comes up always about where are we with nuclear? And I can't envision a long-term future of this country without a significant addition of nuclear generating capacity in this country. The challenge with nuclear is what it's been for years. It's so darn expensive. We have a situation with electric cooperatives that were involved, quite frankly. The latest reactors built were in Georgia, and the initial estimates for those 2 units were around 7 or 8 billion. It came in like at what, 32, 34 billion dollars? And co-ops own 40% of that in Georgia. So they felt that one. Now, in the long run, I think those investments are going to pay off because that asset's going to be there for a long time. And then you hear about, what about this new generation of the small modular reactors? And look, we all would like to see that happen. You can build them in a factory, place them modularly wherever you want. The efficiencies of that, the consistency, I get the potential savings, but let me emphasize potential. I think for the last, we've been saying SMRs were about 10 years away. We've been saying that for the last 20 years. And there's a lot of people spending a lot of money doing R&D to try to perfect it and make that project go forward, that technology move forward. And I hope it does. But my home state, I'm from Utah, I can tell you, we were one of the more advanced going along. All the municipals in Utah were looking at doing an SMR project, and the cost just kept going up and up and up and up, and they all pulled out. So we need to see if we can get there. I talked to the head of the TVA 2 weeks ago, Tennessee Valley Authority, and they're looking at doing a small modular reactor. They're looking for federal funding to help pay for it. And it's a 300 megawatt small modular reactor unit. And he told me, I can build 3,000 megawatts of natural gas generation for the same price. I can get 10 times as much generation for the same dollar doing gas instead of nuclear. So that gives you a feel for where the economics of it are today. But we have yet to build our first SMR. And once you build some, the hope and the idea is you get more efficient and the costs come down and it becomes a credible thing. But I think you're looking out there in the 15 to 20 year range or beyond, and up to that point, I think it's going to be gas. That was a lot longer answer than you probably wanted, but I think that's where we're going.
I know we had one other question here.
Yeah, I don't know how much time you want to take. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, I'd like to thank the leadership of this organization for putting this together and for your presentation, sir, and our access to ask questions. My question is about New Era projects. I'm a cooperative member, but I've got farmland in the Minnesota side and North Dakota side, and been approached by different, let's say, corporations about purchasing land or renting land to build energy farms on, be it solar, wind, whatever. I'm just wondering, is that all part of the New Era projects?
Well, the short answer is there are a lot of people trying to develop those solar or wind farms that are not part of New Era. New Era was specifically for electric cooperatives, but some of the New Era participants, the electric cooperatives, did it where they're not building their own asset. They want to do a power purchase agreement where someone else is instead. So I'm not familiar with which companies are knocking on your door and asking for that, but I do know there's a significant amount of development of those resources outside of New Era as well. But on the electric cooperative side, because of that change in the tax policy I mentioned, that elective pay, more of the co-op proposals now have co-ops owning the facilities and not. So I'm not familiar with who specifically is knocking on your door. And if you told me the name of the company, I wouldn't know if they were working with an electric co-op or not. But I think that's a fair question for you to ask them if they are knocking on your door, and that'll give you a better sense of who they are and who they're associated with.
And that's the thing is, you mentioned in your presentation about third-party companies getting into the game, so to speak, and now you're getting money directly from the government for rural electric cooperatives. And getting to the comment the gentleman made about carbon, I was also in a position where they wanted to get an easement to run across some property for this carbon capture, and I asked this company, because there's layers of companies involved with this, the land acquisition company, the conglomerate that's behind this, and for a dirt farmer, it's like, okay, who am I talking to and what are you gonna do? And is this all legit? Because they're talking, you know, in some cases, big money.
Yeah.
And you don't know where to, are you getting ripped off? And we're talking about good quality farmland, and I appreciate the fact that you work with the DOE, EPA, and the Department of Ag. And just wondering, I've talked to the Congresswoman's office here to find out or check into the credibility of some of this. But, you know, it's all a matter of research. So where I'm going with this is, like you said, the third party. We've got one company that's a conglomerate that's sold out now. They're looking for a section of land. And you don't know if you should get involved in it or not. And so you're taking productive cropland out of production to do this. I'm all part of, you know, contributing if in fact this is where the power company's going and they need this. So I'm just looking for answers and trying to research some of this, so I appreciate your time.
Well, I will say this, you're asking all the right questions. I wish I could answer for you, and I can't, but I do think that, look, every one of these projects is really complicated, and everyone needs to go in with their eyes wide open. And you as a landowner have to make sure you know what you're getting into or what you're not getting into. I don't disagree with anything you're saying, and some of these things are a little newer, but whether it's a gas pipeline or a CO2 pipeline, or whether it's a solar farm or it's an electric transmission line, those all have different attributes to them. And you gotta do what's right for you, obviously. And unfortunately, it's hard to do that research on your own. You got to find someone you can trust, and that's. I wish I could advise you on who to talk to, and I can't. But I do think at least you got your head screwed on straight because you're asking the right questions.
The one reason I ask you about the third party is with this carbon capture, it was a conglomerate that wanted the easement, and the land acquisition company trying to find or get that easement. And so I asked the guy, I said, tell me how this works. This is a startup company under a conglomerate. And the way I got it figured is they're going to get grant money from the government, and they're going to put some money into it, and then you're going to get investors. And this guy said, yeah, that's pretty much about it. So 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And I said, so, because if it goes, it goes. If it doesn't, we're paid and all is good, nothing happens. So I asked him, I said, so the way I get it is, this is a venture project for this carbon capture company. If it doesn't go, the investors are out, the government, it's a grant to them, they're getting subsidized, they don't care if they lose that money. And since it's a big conglomerate, the conglomerate might lose some money on the risk. So that's what I'm concerned about with the power generation farm type stuff. If that is kind of the same racket with these bigger companies.
Well, I'll just say this, when it comes to the power generation, we need so much power that if, you know, you guys decide if they're real and if they're going to build the project or not, but I do think that power generation, the demand in this country is skyrocketing, and any form of electric generation is going to be valuable for the foreseeable future. And although the nuclear is super expensive, But I think that's where we are with demand in this country. So.
Thank you so much, Jim. And I believe, I know you have a short time window. Maybe if we have one more question.
Sure.
And Dylan, I don't know if there's any questions that are coming in from our virtual sites or not, but if not, we can go ahead and take one more here from the gentleman down in front. Just wait for the microphone. There we go.
A member. Now, we've all seen recently 2 grid failures. When you talk about grid reliability, the one in Texas and now the one in Spain, and both were related to so-called renewable or low carbon. My question is, how much of a threat is going the green to the reliability of the grid, and at what point does it become a threat, or does it ever become a threat?
Yeah. Look, it's a good question, and without a direct answer, there's some reasonable proportion mix where everything works great. Like I said, renewables are enhanced by having dispatchable power with it, and quite frankly, the state of Texas is a great example. Texas, because of their geography and their climate, they're the #1 renewable state in America. They got all kinds of solar and they got all kinds of wind. And the interesting thing is the solar is in the heat of the day, and as the solar ramps down late afternoon, the wind kicks in. And so Texas, which last summer had 100-degree days for over 100 days of the summer, they were setting power records every day last summer. They never had an outage. And the solar and wind and solar were a big part of how they met that demand. Now, without the natural gas fossil fuel baseload, it never would have worked though. But it's just an example where if you look at it from a portfolio perspective, there is some value. The challenge in Spain, and there's a lot more research to be done on this, is they went too far and they didn't have enough spinning equipment to start up once it went bad. And so there is some area where you can have, and I'm not an engineer, so I'm, take this with a grain of salt. There's some proportion where if you have too much of lack of spinning equipment, and it's what's called inverter power, which is solar and wind, that's where you can create some reliability challenges. So we got to get out. Trouble in politics is we describe everything as all or none. You got to go 100% of this or 0 of that. We got to get past that. That's not how life isn't that simple usually. And there's some reasonable mix we can do. And by geography and generation mix and whatnot, it's going to be a little different in different parts of the country. Because like I told you, Texas is probably the best place in the country for the renewable combination of solar and wind of any state in the country. So it works great there. If you come to, we're outside of Washington, D.C. in Arlington, Virginia. If you come to Virginia, it doesn't work that well here. There's not any wind. So I can't, there's not one numerical answer to your question, but the concept you're raising of, is there a reasonable mix and are there boundaries outside of that where it compromises reliability? The answer is yes. It's just, I can't tell you what that specific bright line is.
All right, very good. Thank you, Jim, and thank you again for your time this morning, for speaking with the group, and thanks again also for all that NRECA does to give cooperatives that seat at the table. Really appreciate your comments today and your time. Thank you.
Well, and I appreciate the leadership of putting this program together. Not all of our members at COG across the country take the time to have this information gathering and sharing opportunity. And I'm thrilled that Lake Regions jumped into this, and the various other participants in Minnesota have engaged in it as well. This is really neat that you do this, and someday I'd like to come and do it in person. So let's keep me on your invite list, okay?
We will do that. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.